Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tales, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, and shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late. Now let's get into today's tale. Life didn't magically get easier. After that, success didn't erase old wounds. Overnight, I still struggled with feeling like an imposter. Sometimes, like any minute, someone would yank away the rug and reveal that I didn't really belong. But the difference was I kept moving. Anyway, I bought a small brick house just outside of downtown Asheville. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a squeaky screen, door, a lopsided mailbox, but it was mine. I painted the kitchen, a cheerful yellow hung-up art. I had made myself adopted, a big dopey Labrador mix from the shelter named Rocky, who thought he was a lap dog, despite weighing almost 80 lay-bees at night. After work, I would sit on the porch with a cup of tea watching the sun dip behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, feeling something like peace settle in my bones. Not happiness, exactly something. Deeper something earned some weekends. I still saw family around town. Asheville wasn't a big city you couldn't hide forever, even if you wanted to. Once at a Saturday farmer's market, I spotted Aunt Dolores. Across the rows of fresh strawberries, she was holding court with a group of women from the garden club, tossing her head back and laughing in that practiced way she had perfected. Over the years, when she noticed me, her smile faltered. She made her way over quickly, a little too eagerly. "Evelyn, darling," she sang out, clasping my hands in hers like we were old friends. "You simply must come to the Historical Society dinner next month. You'd be such a wonderful addition. They're looking for younger members." You know, I nodded politely, but didn't commit. The truth was, I had no interest in being paraded around like a trophy, now that I was convenient for their reputation. For too long, my worth in their eyes had been measured in how palatable I could make myself. I wasn't playing that game anymore. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even cold. I was just done. Clara, on the other hand, was struggling. I heard bits and pieces through the grapevine. How she had moved into a small rental house on the east side of town. How she was picking up freelance consulting jobs, trying to rebuild something out of the ashes of her old life. There was no official divorce party, no triumphant rebirth, just quiet stumbling attempts to find her footing again. I didn't reach out, not because I hated her, I didn't not anymore, but because every conversation we'd ever had always been on her terms, her world, her conditions. I wasn't willing to step back into that anymore. If she wanted real connection, she would have to meet me halfway, something she had never truly done before, and I wasn't holding my breath. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I found an envelope tucked into my mailbox, no stamp, no return address, just my name, written in tight. Neath in writing inside was a note. "I'm sorry for everything. I wish I had known better. I'm trying. Now, I hope one day we can sit down as equals, not as competition. I miss you. Belle." I read it twice. Then a third time. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase years of slights and wounds, but it was something, a start. Maybe I tucked the letter into the junk drawer, unsure what to do with it, yet work became a steady rhythm. My little business, which had once been a desperate side hustle, born of late-night Googling and trial and error, was now aerial company. We had contracts with 5 school districts, pilot programs in 2 states, and inquiries coming in faster than I could manage. Some nights, sitting at my desk long after midnight, with Rocky snoring loudly at my feet, I would catch myself smiling, not because everything was perfect, but because I was finally building something that belonged entirely to me. Not handed to me, not tolerated, not allowed with conditions, mine. A few months after the Gala, I received an invitation to speak at another event, a regional education conference in Raleigh. Bigger stage, bigger audience. Part of me hesitated. There was still a small, scared version of myself tucked away inside the girl who used to duck behind the kitchen counter when company came over, who had been told without words that she wasn't enough. But I said yes, because fear wasn't in charge anymore. In the weeks leading up to the conference, I threw myself into preparation. I wrote my speech late into the night, pacing. The creaky wooden floors of my house in socks backed her, following me from room to room. I wasn't going to talk about overcoming adversity in some vague, polished way. I was going to tell the truth. Messy, ugly, beautiful truth about dropping out, about working minimum wage, about building something real without anyone's permission. And I knew deep in my gut that no matter who was in that audience, I belonged there. Not because of a degree, not because of a title, but because of the sheer stubborn fact that I had gotten back up again and again when it would have been easier to stay down the morning of the conference. As I packed my notes into my bag, my phone buzzed a new text. Clara, good luck today. I'm proud of you. I stared at the screen for a long time. It didn't undo the past, it didn't fix everything, but it was something, a crack in the armor. I didn't reply. Right away, I slipped the phone into my bag and headed out the door. Some things needed time to settle, to breathe. Not everything had to be rushed. Not every wound needed to be ripped open, again just to prove it was healing. Some things could just exist, quietly, like forgiveness, like hope. Maybe the conference in Raleigh was held at the convention center. Downtown, a huge glass building that glittered under the sharp spring sunlight inside. The air buzzed with quiet energy, teachers, administrators, non-profit leaders, moving between booths and panel sessions, sipping coffee, clutching tote bags heavy with pamphlets, and free pens. I checked in at the speaker table, collected my name tag, Evelyn Dalton, founder and CEO, Bright Start Educational Tools, and found a quiet corner to steady myself. Despite everything, despite the gala, despite the standing ovation, despite the dozens of talks I'd given, since a familiar flutter stirred in my chest. Not fear exactly, more like a kind of sacred bone, deep awareness that this was real, a fluke. Not a mistake, not an accident. Waiting to be corrected by someone more qualified, just me right here, right now. The session before mine ran late. I stood backstage fiddling with the clasp of my bracelet, sipping lukewarm water from a upper cup out. In the audience, a few familiar faces popped up. Former colleagues, a couple of teachers from Asheville who had helped me pilot my first products. They waved when they saw me. I smiled back, feeling the nod, and my stomach loosened slightly when my turn came. I walked out onto the stage without hesitating. The microphone squeaked a little as I adjusted it. I looked out over the crowd, a few hundred people all waiting, some flipping through the conference programs, others leaning forward, attentive. And then I spoke. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't tell some sanitized version of success. I told the truth about leaving high school at 17 with no plan, and no map, about working nights at a 24-hour diner where the fluorescent lights buzzed so loudly you could feel it in your teeth, about scraping together a few dollars here and there, buying secondhand textbooks on business and design, watching free lectures online because college was too expensive. I talked about failure, the early prototypes that flopped, the embarrassing meetings where no one took me seriously, the long nights lying awake, convinced I was chasing a pipe dream, and I talked about what kept me going. The kids who needed tools made for them, not for standardized test scores. The quiet conviction that even if nobody else believed in me, I could still build something worthwhile. When I finished there, wassailants and then applause, not polite board clapping. Real applause, sustained, heartfelt, echoing through the huge glass hall. I stood there for a moment, letting it sink, in feeling it settle into the spaces inside me that had stayed hollow for too long. Afterward, people lined up to talk to me. A principal from Durham who wanted to pilot my tools in his district, a nonprofit director who said my story reminded her why she started teaching 20 years ago, a mother of a dyslexic child who pressed my hand and said, Thank you for seeing kids like mine." It wasn't the accolades that mattered. It wasn't the opportunities or the business cards. It was the feeling, deep, quiet, immovable, that I had finally fully stepped into my own life, not borrowed, not tolerated, not permitted, owned. Later, sitting outside the Seattle Convention Center with a latte and a turkey sandwich, scrolling absent-mindedly through my phone, I saw another text from Clara. "Clara, saw some clips from your speech. You were incredible. I mean it this time." I smiled. I typed back slowly, "Thank you. Clara, that means a lot. I didn't say more, didn't dive into old wounds or try to entangle the mess of our past right there over text. Some conversations needed to happen face to face. Some things needed time to heal properly. But it was a beginning, a fragile, uncertain beginning, but a beginning. Nonetheless, driving home that evening, the mountains came into view just as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the hills. The sky blazed in colors no camera could capture properly. Gold, deep purple, blood orange fading into twilight rolled down the windows. Rocky in the passenger seat stuck his head out and let his tongue L happily in the breeze. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized I wasn't carrying that old ache anymore. The ache of needing to prove myself, needing to earn a place at tables that had been built to exclude me. I had built my own table, and it was enough, maybe more than enough. About a month after the Raleigh conference, Clara asked to meet. She didn't text it. She called an actual voice call, and for a second I thought I'd imagined it would. You have time for coffee sometime? She asked, voice tentative. I'd like to talk. Really talk for a long moment. I said nothing, not because I was angry, but because I needed a second to remember that it was me who had the choice now. Not her, not the family me. I think I'd like that. I said. Finally, we agreed to meet at a small coffee shop near downtown Asheville. The kind of place with creaky wooden floors and mismatched who you were as long as you paid for your scone the day of the meeting. I got there early. I chose a seat by the window. A small two-top table with a battered surface and sunlight slanting across the wood. I wasn't nervous, not exactly, but there was a tightness in my chest that wouldn't quite leave. 10 minutes later, Clara arrived. She looked different still, beautiful but stripped down. Somehow, no designer bag, no stilettos, just jeans, a simple sweater, hair pulled back into a low bun. She spotted me and hesitated. For a second, just enough for me to see the crack in her perfect facade, and then made her way. Over, we ordered coffee. She picked at a blueberry muffin. She barely touched Fora while we talked about safe things. The weather, some community event coming up, how hard it was to find good parking downtown. Finally, Clara took a breath and leaned forward. I was horrible to you, she said quietly. Not just at the gala, our whole lives. I said nothing. She fidgeted with the sleeve of her sweater. I thought if I stayed ahead of you, if I stayed better, I'd be safe, that people would love memory, that I wouldn't get left behind. Her voice cracked at the edges. I realize now, she said, eyes shining. It wasn't you. I was trying to outrun it, was myself. I let her words sit there. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I didn't smooth it over for her. For the first time, she sat in the discomfort of it, the realness of it, and that was her burden to carry, not mine. After a long pause, she said, I'm trying to start over. I know I don't deserve anything from you. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry, and I'm proud of you, genuinely proud. I sipped my coffee. Slowly, the bitterness settled warmly on my tongue. Thank you, I said finally. She nodded, almost relieved, and just like that, something shifted, subtle, almost invisible but real. Not a full reconciliation, not a magical healing where everything went back to how it should have been, but a real adult acknowledgement that the past had happened, that it hurt, that we couldn't change it, and that maybe we could move forward anyway. When we finished our coffee, Clara offered to pay, let her small as it was. It felt like a gesture she needed to make. As we stood outside, she hesitated. Maybe we could meet again sometime, she asked. No pressure. I smiled a soft, genuine smile. Maybe. And this time, the maybe wasn't a no, it wasn't a yes, either. It was a promise to myself that whatever happened, I would choose every time what was right. For me, not guilt, not pity, not old loyalty. Ode to people who didn't earn it. Me later that afternoon, as I sat on my porch. Rocky sprawled across my feet, and the mountains casting long, beautiful shadows across the valley. I thought about what real revenge looked like. It wasn't the standing ovation. At the Gala, it wasn't watching Clara's carefully constructed life fall apart. It wasn't triumph or gloating or proving a point. It was this sitting here, whole and unbroken on a life I built with my own hands, not needing their approval anymore. Not needing anything from anyone who once thought I was a stain they had to hide. The best revenge wasn't revenge at all. It was becoming someone they could never diminish, no matter how hard they tried. My sister begged, "Don't show up at the gala tonight." "Why not?" I asked, holding back tears. She rolled her eyes because everyone there has a degree, not just a GED. My aunt whispered, "You're a stain on this family." I walked away quietly, but when my name was announced as the keynote speaker, I saw her face turn ghost white. The crowd stood. She hid behind a napkin. Growing up, there were unspoken rules in my family. Clara was the shining star, and I was the background noise. My name's Evelyn Dalton, and if you're from Asheville, North Carolina, you might already know my sister's name, Clara Dalton Hargrove, homecoming queen, summa cum laude, graduate from Duke, married into a family so rich they once bought a whole mountaintop reserve, the view. Meanwhile, I was the daughter who dropped out of high school, earned a GED at 17, and spent years working behind diner counters, cleaning hotel rooms, and stringing together rent money like loose change. I wasn't bitter about it, not all the time anyway. My parents, Russell and Francis, didn't hide their preferences at family dinners. Dad would beam as Clara talked about her internships and travel programs. Mom would boast about her future, grandchildren living in the right neighborhoods, going to the right schools. When I mentioned a new job, buzzing tables, or passing my driver's test, the room would quiet like someone had hit mute. It wasn't hatred. It was indifference, which honestly hurt. More, the gala was supposed to be Clara's night. She was being honored for her community work with the Mallister Foundation, a network of old money philanthropists who could trace their bloodlines back to the Mayflower. I received an invitation, out of obligation, thick, creamy cardstock with golden script. No personal note, just "You're cordially invited." I stuck it on my fridge and tried not to think about it. The day of the event, the tension started. Eerily, my Aunt Dolores cornered me outside the bakery that morning. "You're not really going, are you?" she asked her. "Yes," darting up and down my plain jeans and thrifted coat. I shrugged. Thinking about it, she leaned in, the smell of lavender perfume and cigarette smoke curling off her. "Don't be foolish, Evelyn. These are not your people. You'll just bring things down." I forced a smile, but my chest ached by late afternoon. I sat staring at the silver dress I had rented $45 for the weekend from a second-hand boutique in town. It shimmered softly in the sunlight, looking far more expensive than it was. My phone buzzed. It was Clara. I almost didn't pick up, but some masochistic part of me answered. "Please," she said the moment I answered. "Don't come tonight." There was a long silence. "Why not?" I asked, my voice careful, measured. "Because she snapped everyone. There has a degree, not just a GED." It wasn't the words so much as the disgust in her tone, like I was a stain she couldn't scrub out in time for her big night. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply said, "Got it," and hung up the drive to Charleston. Took 3 hours. Almost turned around twice. My hands shook the whole way, but I kept staring forward. The Mallister Gala was held at the Charleston Gallard Center. Massive chandeliers, marble floors so polished you could see your reflection, and waiters in starched tuxedos carrying champagne trays. As I stepped through the front doors, heads turned, some polite smiles, mostly curious glances. Clara was near the center of the room, radiant in a pale gold gown that clung to her perfectly toned body. She was laughing with 2 men in suits who looked like they owned entire islands. When she spotted me, her smile froze her. Hand clenched around her wine glass, found a spot near the wall. Careful to stay out of the center, just as I'd been trained my whole life, the speeches began. The room quieted. "I have listened," awards, given donations, announced, then the master of ceremonies. A large man with a booming voice cleared his throat, and "No," he said, smiling broadly. "We are honored to welcome a keynote speaker who embodies resilience, innovation, and true community impact. Please give a warm welcome to Ms. Evelyn Dalton, D." It took a second for the words to sink in. I heard Belle's gasp loud enough that people near her turned to look. The spotlight swung toward me. There was no hiding. Now my legs moved on autopilot as I crossed the ballroom up the steps behind the podium me. Hands gripped the sides so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "Good evening," I said, my voice steady despite the ocean of faces staring back at me. "Want to tell you a story?" I began not about perfect GPA or elite universities, about something messier, harder. I spoke about growing up overlooked, about working minimum wage jobs, about teaching myself graphic design late at night after 12-hour diner shifts. I told them how out of frustration I created educational tools for kids who learned differently, and how that tiny business grew into a company that now partnered with school districts nationwide. I spoke about failure, persistence, grit. When I finished, there was a long, loaded silence. Then someone stood up. Then another, then another. A standing ovation. I stood there blinking. Applause roared through the hall like a tidal wave out of the corner of my eye. I saw Clara. Her face had gone ghost white. She was dabbing her mouth furiously with a napkin as if trying to erase the moment. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I simply bowed my head slightly and left the stage later by the bar. Strangers approached me. "That was incredible," one woman said, squeezing my hand. "You're so inspiring," another man said, handing me his card. I tucked the compliments, scarefully, into my heart, not to flaunt, but to fill the long-starved parts of myself that had craved recognition for so long. Clara never came over, neither did my Aunt Dolores. I didn't expect them to. I drove back to Asheville late that night with the windows cracked open, letting the cool, salt-tinged air rush, and the road was mostly empty. The stars, sharp and bright overhead. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the heavy, invisible weight of shame that had settled on my shoulders every time my family looked at me. It was still there, faintly, but manageable, like an old scar. You can run your fingers over, without flinching. The next few days passed quietly. At first I thought maybe no one would say anything, that my family would pretend the gala hadn't happened, erase it the way they erased every one of my small triumphs growing up. But then, the call started. First from Uncle Henry, asked if voicemail, congratulating me, though his voice sounded tight, like he was forcing the words out past gritted teeth. Then from Cousin Meredith, who had once told me to my face that some people just aren't college material. Now she was suddenly interested in grabbing coffee and catching up. I deleted her text without answering. "Even me," Mother called. "You looked polished," she said over the phone, as if the word itself tasted sour. "I suppose we didn't realize you'd come so far." I didn't know how to respond to that. Was it an apology, an olive branch, or just a grudging acknowledgement that I had slipped through the cracks they built to keep me in my place? In the end, it didn't really matter. Clara stayed silent. No calls, no texts. I figured she was licking her wounds, nursing whatever story she would tell herself to survive the embarrassment. Maybe she would pretend it hadn't happened. Maybe she would spin it. Somehow she was good at that. But the universe had other plans. About a month later, news broke that Brian Bell's husband was under investigation. Apparently, he had been siphoning off funds from the real estate projects he managed. Millions of dollars gone. Fraud charges were looming. It was everywhere: the local papers, the news channels, even the gossip websites. Brian's smug, well-groomed face stared out from the TV screen. One afternoon, as I sat sipping coffee at the kitchen table, the irony was so thick I could barely breathe. All those years I'd been the stain on the family. All those years, I was the one they were embarrassed to invite places, and nowhere was their golden boy, their shining connection to wealth and prestige, about to be dragged into federal court. Didn't feel satisfaction, not really. Mostly I felt a deep, hollow sadness for all the years wasted trying to measure up to a standard that had been rotten from the start. Word traveled fast, in Asheville. Within days, family friends started pulling away from Claire. Invitations dried up. Even my mother, fiercely loyal to appearances, stopped mentioning her during calls. Aunt Dolores, she switched gears overnight. Now she was calling me, inviting me to family luncheons and charity events like I was some kind of novelty. "We're so proud of you, Evelyn," she trilled over the phone one afternoon. "You must come to the Kiwanis banquet next month. Everyone's dying to meet you." I held the phone away from my ear for a second, staring at it like it had sprouted wings, proud of me. After decades of pretending I didn't exist, it would have been laughable if it weren't so tragic. A few weeks later, I ran into Clara. It was at Engels Market near the produce section. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a worn sweatshirt, a far cry from the manicured perfection she used to carry like a second skin. She froze when she saw me, stopped too, my basket dangling from my fingers for a long moment. Neither of us said anything. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "You must be happy," she said flatly. I shook my head slowly. "No, Belly, I'm not happy about any of it." She looked away, fiddling with the sleeves of her sweatshirt. Her hands were trembling. "I didn't know how to be anything but better than you," she said, voice breaking on the last words. "I'm sorry, I really am. There was a time when I would have clung to that apology like a life raft, when I would have tried to fix things, smooth them over, beg for closeness. But I wasn't that person. Anymore." I just nodded. "I hope you figure things out," I said softly. And then I walked away, leaving a stunned Clara standing between the onions and the potatoes.